Hello everybody! If you want to read all the stories in full, please go to www.steveuk.blog. Thank you. Short story 328, The Cold Morning Dilemma. Intermediate. John Harris was a 60-year-old man who lived in a quaint village nestled in the English countryside. He was a kind-hearted soul, known for his warm smiles and willingness to lend a helping hand. It was a chilly December morning, and the air was crisp with a bitter cold that seemed to cut through layers of clothing. John had an important day ahead. He needed to drive to the nearby town for a medical appointment and a few errands. As he stepped out of his cosy cottage, he was greeted by a thick layer of frost covering the ground. His breath formed visible clouds in the icy air. He made his way to his old but reliable car, a vintage Morris Minor that he had cherished for years. The car was parked in the driveway, looking like a frosted relic from another era. John loved this car. It held many memories of road trips and family outings. He inserted the key into the ignition and turned it, expecting the familiar roar of the engine. But instead, he was met with a feeble clicking sound. He tried again, hoping it was just a fluke. But the same disappointing noise greeted him. John sighed deeply, realizing his car battery was flat. "Not today," he muttered to himself, frustration evident in his voice. He needed to get to his appointment, and there was no time to waste. John didn't have a mobile phone, so calling for help wasn't an option. He would have to solve this problem the old-fashioned way. John bundled up in his warmest coat and set off on foot towards his neighbour's house. Mrs. Thompson, his next-door neighbour, was a sprightly woman in her late 50s. She was always up early, tending to her garden, even in the cold. John knocked on her door, and after a few moments she appeared, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "Good morning, John. What brings you out on such a cold day?" she asked cheerfully. "Morning, Mrs. Thompson. My car battery's flat and I need to get to town. Do you happen to have any jump leads?" John inquired. Mrs. Thompson nodded and invited John inside to warm up. She handed him a steaming cup of tea while she fetched the jump leads from her garage. They chatted for a bit about the weather and the latest village gossip. John felt a sense of gratitude for having such kind neighbours. With the jump leads in hand, they both headed back to John's car. Mrs. Thompson had an old Land Rover, which she positioned next to John's Morris Minor. John carefully attached the jump leads to both car batteries, ensuring they were properly connected. Mrs. Thompson started her car, and John tried the ignition again. This time the engine roared to life, and John sighed with relief. "Oh, thank you so much, Mrs. Thompson. I don't know what I would have done without you," John said, his face lighting up with a smile. "No problem at all, John. Just glad I could help," she replied warmly. With his car now running, John headed to town. The drive was smooth, and he arrived at his appointment just in time. He completed his errands, picking up groceries and a few supplies for his home. On his way back, John couldn't help but reflect on the morning's events. He realized how important it was to have a community and neighbours who looked out for one another. It reminded him of the strength and resilience that came from these connections. When he returned home, John decided to bake a batch of his famous scones as a thank you to Mrs. Thompson. He packed them neatly in a basket and took them over to her house. She was delighted by the gesture, and they shared a pleasant afternoon with tea and scones. That night, as John settled into his favourite armchair by the fire, he felt a deep sense of contentment. Despite the cold and the initial setback, the day had turned out to be a reminder of the kindness and support that existed in his small village. It was a day he would remember fondly, not for the problem he faced, but for the warmth and generosity that helped him overcome it. Vocabulary notes. Quaint, meaning attractively unusual or old-fashioned. Example, John Harris was a 60-year-old man who lived in a quaint village nestled in the English countryside. Similar words, charming, picturesque, old-fashioned. Bitter, meaning of weather, intensely cold. Example, it was a chilly December morning and the air was crisp with a bitter cold that seemed to cut through layers of clothing. Similar words, freezing, icy, biting. Reliable, meaning consistently good in quality or performance, able to be trusted. Example, he made his way to his old but reliable car, a vintage Morris Minor. Similar words, dependable, trustworthy, steadfast. Feeble, meaning lacking physical strength, especially as a result of age or illness. Example, but instead he was met with a feeble clicking sound. Similar words, weak, faint, fragile. Bundle, meaning to wrap or tie something or someone up tightly. Example, John bundled up in his warmest coat and set off on foot towards his neighbour's house. Similar words, wrap, swaddle, cover. Sprightly, meaning especially of an old person. Lively and full of energy. Example, Mrs. Thompson, his next-door neighbour, was a sprightly woman in her late 50s. Similar words, lively, energetic, vivacious. Feeble, meaning lacking strength or vigour. Example, but instead he was met with a feeble clicking sound. Similar words, weak, frail, faint. Steaming, meaning emitting steam or a vapour, often from being heated. Example, she handed him a steaming cup of tea while she fetched the jump leads. Similar words, hot, boiling, scalding. Jump leads, meaning cables used to start a vehicle with a flat battery by connecting it to another vehicle's battery. Example, John carefully attached the jump leads to both car batteries, ensuring they were properly connected. Similar words, jumper cables, booster cables, battery cables. Gratitude, meaning the quality of being thankful, readiness to show appreciation for and to return kindness. Example, John felt a sense of gratitude for having such kind neighbours. Similar words, thankfulness, appreciation, gratefulness. Story written by Copilot AI and Steve UK. Image created by Copilot and Designer AI. To read all the stories in full, please go to www.steveuk.blog. Thank you.